My stepbrother smashed through my door at 3 a.m. and destroyed every trophy I'd ever earned. What he revealed next proved my own father had been planning to erase me for months. The door didn't just open. It came off one hinge, swinging crooked into my room at 3:04 a.m., and for the first half second, I thought I was still dreaming, because the person standing in the wreckage of my doorframe was someone I'd shared a bathroom with for 6 months and never once seen raise his voice. "I want his room, and I want it now," Logan screamed. I was 17, half asleep, blinking at a stranger wearing my stepbrother's face. Logan was 17 too. We'd started as strangers who happened to live in the same house and had, over 6 months, settled into something like a truce. Not friends, not enemies, just two kids navigating a blended family neither of us had asked for. He'd never so much as slammed a door before that night. He shoved past my dad, who'd come running down the hall in a t-shirt and boxers, looking as confused as I felt, and started tearing my stuff off the shelves. Textbooks hit the floor in a fan of pages. He grabbed my laptop off the desk and held it up like he was deciding whether to throw it. "Tell him the truth or I will," Logan snarled at my father. My dad's face went the color of the drywall behind him. Sheila, his wife of 8 months, Logan's mother, appeared in the doorway in her bathrobe, already crying, her voice small in a way I'd never heard it. "Logan, please. We talked about waiting. I'm done waiting," Logan said. His voice cracked on the word done, somewhere between rage and something that sounded almost like grief. "It's been 6 months of watching him live in what should be mine." Then he said the sentence that turned my whole night sideways. "You said he was temporary." I need to back up, because none of what happened in my doorway at 3 a.m. makes sense without 6 months of context I didn't have until that exact moment. My name's Ethan. I'm 17, a junior, and up until that October, I would have told you my life was, if not perfect, at least stable. My parents divorced when I was 12. No drama, no custody battle, just two people who'd stopped being a couple and handled it like adults. I split time between my mom's place 2 states away during summers and holidays, and my dad's house the rest of the year, which had always been the arrangement, and which I'd never questioned. My dad remarried in March. Sheila, a woman he'd met 18 months earlier, and her son Logan moved in with us that same month. I liked Logan fine. We weren't close, but we weren't enemies.
He played baseball, I did chess club and Eagle Scouts, and we mostly orbited each other politely in a house that had until then been just mine and my dad's. I'd noticed things over those 6 months, small things. Sheila referring to when Logan gets his own room, in passing conversations that trailed off before I could ask what she meant. My dad seeming distracted in a way that didn't track with anything I could point to. Once, in August, I walked into the kitchen, and both of them went quiet in the specific way adults go quiet when they've been talking about you. I told myself it was nothing. New marriage, new house dynamics, everybody adjusting. I had a chess tournament that month, then the start of junior year, then Eagle Scout project hours to log. I had a life that felt too full and too normal to leave room for suspicion. But looking back, there were more flags than the one in the kitchen, and I've spent a lot of hours since that October picking through them. The way you replay a movie a second time once you know the ending, and suddenly notice all the clues you missed the first watch. There was the night in June, maybe 2 weeks after Logan moved in, when Sheila stood in the hallway measuring my bedroom doorframe with a tape measure for curtains, she said, though my room didn't have curtains and never had. I thought it was strange in the vague, forgettable way you think anything is strange when you have no reason yet to build a theory out of it. There was a Sunday in July when my dad took me out for pancakes, just the two of us, which hadn't happened in months, and spent most of the meal asking questions that felt oddly formal for a man I'd lived with my whole life. Was I happy? Did I think I'd like a change of pace? Had I ever thought about a school with more structure, more challenge, somewhere I could really push myself? I remember telling him no, that I liked my school, that I had chess club and track, and Mr. Halloran's AP physics class that I'd been looking forward to since freshman year. He nodded slowly and didn't bring it up again. I thought I'd answered a real question. I hadn't realized I'd failed a test. There was the afternoon in September when I came home early from practice and found Sheila in my room, not doing anything obviously wrong, just standing near my closet with a notepad, jotting something down. She said she was getting a feel for space for a linen closet reorganization project. I believed her, because believing her was easier than the alternative, and because 17-year-olds are not generally in the business of suspecting their stepmother of measuring them out of their own bedroom. And there was Logan himself, who I'd started to notice going quiet at dinner in a way that didn't match the easygoing kid who'd moved in back in March. He'd stopped inviting friends over. He'd stopped talking about baseball season, which had been basically his only topic of conversation for the first 2 months he lived with us. Once, loading the dishwasher together, he'd said, out of nowhere, "You ever feel like everyone already decided who you're gonna be before you got a say in it?" I'd said something dumb and non-committal, the kind of thing you say when a conversation gets heavier than you're prepared for at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday. And the moment passed, and I never asked him what he meant. I think about that dishwasher conversation more than almost anything else from those 6 months. I think it was the closest either of us ever came to telling the other the truth before the truth came out in the worst possible way, at 3 a.m., through a broken door. I didn't know my bedroom had a countdown attached to it. I just knew, in the vague way you know a storm is coming before the sky actually changes color, that something in that house had stopped sitting right, and that nobody was going to tell me what it was until it was already happening to me.
Logan pulled a folded stack of papers out of his sweatpants pocket. Printed emails, I realized. The pages soft at the edges like they'd been handled and refolded a dozen times. Branson Military Academy, he said, throwing them at my chest. Starting January. My stomach dropped the way it does on the first hill of a roller coaster. That half second where your body knows something your brain hasn't caught up to yet. I grabbed the papers off the floor. My hands were shaking so hard the pages made a dry, papery sound in the quiet room. Emails printed and dated 3 months earlier, between my father's account and Sheila's, discussing enrollment timelines, tuition deposits, transition logistics for a school 600 miles away that I had never once heard mentioned in my own house. Logan wasn't finished. He held up his phone, screen bright in the dark room, a banking app open to a transaction history. October 15th, he said. Same day you told me I'd get the bigger room once he was gone. $20,000, non-refundable deposit. I stared at my father. I remember exactly what I said because it's the only full sentence I got out before my voice gave up on me. You paid a deposit to get rid of me? He couldn't look at me. He looked at the carpet, at the door frame hanging off its hinge, anywhere but at my face. That's when Logan's control finally broke completely. He grabbed my dresser and shoved it hard enough that the mirror on top cracked diagonally across the glass. He tore my awards off the wall one at a time. The plaque from the state chess championship, my honor roll certificates, the Eagle Scout Board of Review letter I'd framed myself, and threw them to the floor. You made me look like a failure just by existing, he spat, and something about the way he said it, raw and cracking, told me this wasn't really about me at all. It was about 6 months of hearing, in some form, that he wasn't enough, that the real son, the biological one, was the problem to be solved before Logan could have what he'd apparently been promised. I didn't fight him. I didn't yell back. I did the only thing that occurred to me in that moment. The one thing 17 years of being the responsible one had trained into me even at 3 a.m. in a room full of broken glass. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand and forwarded every single email to my mother. I want to mention something I left out at first because it's not flattering, and because for a long time I told myself it didn't matter. It matters. 4 days before the door came off its hinges, I actually tried to solve this on my own, quietly the way I'd solved every other problem in that house for 6 months, by managing around it instead of naming it out loud. I'd noticed Sheila and my dad huddled over his laptop at the kitchen table on a Wednesday night, screens angled away from me the second I walked in, and instead of asking directly, I did what I always did. I assumed the best, then went looking for evidence to support the assumption instead of testing it. I told myself they were probably planning something for my birthday, which was coming up in November. I actually convinced myself of that story hard enough that I mentioned it to a friend at chess club, joked about hoping it wasn't another surprise party I have to pretend to be surprised at. 2 nights later, unable to shake a low hum of unease I still couldn't name, I did something I'd never done before in that house. I asked my dad directly, standing in the garage while he changed the oil in his truck, if everything was okay, if there was something going on with Sheila and Logan that I should know about. He wiped his hands on a rag for a long time before he answered. Everything's fine, bud, he said. We're just figuring some things out, adult stuff. He wouldn't look at me while he said it, the same way he wouldn't look at me 4 days later in my bedroom doorway, and I remember standing there in the garage feeling the specific, hollow disappointment of being lied to by someone you have no evidence yet to prove is lying, just a feeling in your chest that doesn't have a name. I let it go. I told myself I was overthinking it, that adult stuff probably meant finances or in-laws or something equally mundane and none of my business. I went back inside and did my calculus homework and didn't think about it again until Logan kicked my door off its hinge 4 nights later holding printouts that explained exactly what adult stuff had actually meant the entire time. I've had to sit with that. The fact that I had a chance to ask the right question a few days earlier, and I asked a soft version of it instead, and got a soft, false answer, and let it go because it was easier than pushing. I don't think 17-year-olds are supposed to know how to interrogate their own fathers, but I think about that garage conversation more than I'd like to, because it was the last quiet moment before everything got loud, and some small part of me has never quite forgiven myself for not pushing harder when I still had the chance to. She lived 2 states away, in Charlotte, and she had joint legal custody, which meant, among other things, that her signature was legally required for any change to my school enrollment. I didn't fully understand the weight of that fact until about 90 seconds later when my dad's phone rang and he answered it, dazed, on speaker, apparently too rattled to think to take it off. What's this about military school? My mother's voice came through tinny and furious and absolutely clear. You need my signature for any school changes, Richard. I'm driving down right now, with my lawyer. Logan punched the wall. I mean that literally. His fist went straight through the drywall next to my closet, and the sound of it, a wet crack of plaster and lath, seemed to finally snap something loose in the room. Sheila screamed. My dad grabbed Logan by the shoulders and pulled him back into the hallway, both of them breathing hard, and I stood there in the wreckage of my own bedroom at 3:20 in the morning holding a phone with my mother's voice still coming through the speaker, asking if I was okay. Quick pause. If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify's linked in the description. A neighbor had already called the police by then, Mrs. Alvarez, 2 doors down, who later told an officer she'd heard what sounded like someone breaking down a door through her bedroom window. 2 patrol cars arrived at 4:50 a.m. Officer Devin Marsh, 11 years with the department according to the report I later read, walked the house house with a flashlight, photographing the broken door hanging off its hinge, the fist-sized hole in the drywall, my trophies scattered across the carpet with glass from the cracked mirror glittering between them. He didn't arrest anyone that night. Domestic disputes between minors in a family home rarely result in an immediate arrest, he explained to my dad, but he filed a full incident report, case number and all, and told my father, flatly, professionally, the way cops talk when they've already decided what they think of a situation, that CPS might be in touch given a minor's involvement in property destruction of this scale. My mother arrived at 8:30 that morning. She'd driven 3.5 hours through the night, and she wasn't alone. Beside her, stepping out of the passenger seat in a sharp charcoal suit despite the early hour, was a woman carrying a leather briefcase like she'd done this 100 times before. "I'm Veronica Richards," she said, extending a hand to my father like this was a business meeting and not the aftermath of his son's stepbrother tearing my room apart. "Family law, 17 years. I represent Ethan's mother." She didn't raise her voice once that entire morning. She asked to see the military school documents, spread every page across our dining table, and photographed each one methodically on her phone. A habit, she told me later, of building a clean evidentiary record before anyone could claim a document had gone missing or been altered. Then she found the signature line at the bottom of the enrollment form. 2 names, my father's and my mother's, except my mother had never signed anything. "This is forgery," Veronica said, flat. Not a raised eyebrow, not a dramatic pause, just a statement of fact, the way you'd read a thermometer. My father tried to explain that he hadn't submitted the form yet, that it was just a placeholder, that he'd never actually intended to fake the signature. Veronica set one finger on the calendar hanging in our kitchen, on a date circled in red 2 weeks out, the enrollment deadline, and asked him evenly how exactly he'd planned to have my mother's signature on a form she'd never seen, submitted before a deadline she didn't know existed. He didn't have an answer. My mother, standing at the counter with her arms crossed, looked like she'd stopped being surprised by anything my father could do a long time ago. The custody modification hearing was scheduled fast, given the police report and the forged signature evidence Veronica had already assembled. 2 weeks from that morning, in a family courtroom I'd never had reason to set foot in before. My father's attorney, a man who spent most of his opening statement talking about the structure and discipline military school could provide a teenage boy, argued that Branson Academy would build my character, instill responsibility, give me the kind of backbone a kid needs heading into adulthood. Veronica stood up and laid a single folder on the table. My academic transcript, printed straight from the school district. Straight A's, 4 years running, varsity track. Eagle Scout, 2 years ahead of the typical timeline. 0 disciplinary incidents in 11 years of public education. "What character correction?" she asked the judge, not even raising her voice. "Does a student like this need?" Then she called Logan to the stand. He was smaller up there than he'd been in my doorway at 3 a.m. A 17-year-old kid in a collared shirt his mother had clearly picked out for him, mumbling that it was just a normal argument that got out of hand. Veronica didn't push him hard. She didn't need to. She held up the photographs Officer Marsh had taken, the door hanging off its hinge, the fist-sized hole in the drywall, the cracked mirror, and simply asked him to confirm they were accurate depictions of that night. He confirmed it. That was enough. Sheila took the stand next. Under oath, with Veronica walking her calmly through the timeline of the past 6 months, Sheila admitted what I'd never heard out loud until that moment, that she had told my father I made Logan look pathetic just by existing, compared to my grades, my scouting, my chess trophies, and that sending me to military school would, in her words, level the playing field for her own son. The courtroom went dead silent. I remember the specific quality of that silence. Not shocked exactly, more like the sound of a room collectively deciding it had just heard the actual truth for the first time. My father's attorney tried to recover on cross-examination, asking Sheila if she'd ever actually told my father to move forward with the enrollment against his own judgment, clearly fishing for a version of events where my father had been talked into something he never truly wanted. Sheila hesitated, glanced toward my dad at the defense table, and then, to her credit, didn't take the exit she was being offered. "He agreed with me," she said quietly. "I didn't have to talk him into much of anything." Veronica didn't even need to redirect after that. She let the silence do the work, the same way she'd let the photographs do the work with Logan, the same way she'd let the transcript do the work with the judge. I noticed, watching her, that she almost never raised her voice in that courtroom. She didn't need to. She built her case out of documents and other people's own words, and let everyone else in the room supply the outrage. Then Veronica called one more witness I hadn't expected. My school counselor, Ms. Rosalind Cho, who'd worked in the district for 9 years and had written 2 of my scholarship recommendation letters that spring. She testified, calm and matter-of-fact, that she'd met with me twice that fall for standard college track advising sessions, and that at no point had I displayed any behavior consistent with a student who needed disciplinary intervention. No missed assignments, no conflicts with teachers, nothing in my file remotely resembling the structure and discipline argument my father's attorney kept returning to. She'd pulled my full academic file at Veronica's request, printed and stamped by the district registrar, and it sat on the table next to my father's forged signature like 2 versions of the same kid nobody in that room could reconcile with each other. The one on paper, thriving, and the one my father and Sheila had apparently decided needed to disappear. My father took the stand last. His voice cracked twice before he got through his first full sentence. He admitted the pressure from Sheila, admitted he'd drafted the enrollment form with both signature lines filled in weeks before telling me anything, admitted, quietly, staring at his own hands, that he'd chosen the easier path of making a problem disappear instead of the harder path of protecting his own son. The judge, a woman named Judge Patricia Ndiaye, who Veronica told me afterward had a reputation for moving fast once the facts were clear, didn't need long to decide. She awarded my mother full primary custody, effective immediately. My father was granted supervised visitation only, contingent on completing 6 months of family counseling with a licensed therapist before any modification would be reconsidered. In her ruling, she specifically cited the forged signature attempt as an aggravating factor, noting for the record that attempting to falsify a co-parent's legal consent was not, in her words, an error in judgment, but a deliberate act. Sheila shot up out of her seat, screaming that it wasn't fair to Logan, that he'd get nothing out of this, that the family was being torn apart over one bad night. Judge Ndiaye looked at her without so much as raising her voice. "Ma'am, you may sit down, or you may leave my courtroom. Those are your only two options right now." Sheila stormed out. The door slammed behind her hard enough that the sound rolled down the marble hallway outside, and for a second, nobody in that courtroom moved, like we were all listening to the last echo of 6 months finally ending. I live with my mom now, in Charlotte, in a house with a bedroom door that's never once come off its hinges. I finished junior year there, made varsity track at my new school too, and I still have my chess trophies. Veronica actually helped me file a small claims request for the cost of the broken mirror and the damaged awards, and my father paid it without a fight. The one thing in that whole mess he didn't argue about. I talked to my dad on a supervised basis, same as the ruling required, mostly over video calls that are still a little stiff, a little careful, like we're both relearning how to talk to each other without $20,000 and a forged signature sitting in the room with us. He finished the counseling. He tells me, every call, that he's sorry, and I believe that he means it, even if I'm still working out what to do with an apology that arrived after the deposit had already cleared. I don't know what happened between Logan and his mother after that courtroom. I heard secondhand that they moved out of my dad's house within a month. I don't wish Logan anything bad. If anything, I think about that 3 a.m. version of him more than I probably should. A kid who broke a door down not because he wanted to hurt me, but because he'd spent 6 months being told, quietly and constantly, that he'd only get to matter once I was gone. That's not something either of us chose. It's just what the adults in our lives decided to build, and we were both left standing in the wreckage of it at 3 a.m., on opposite sides of the same bad plan. I actually saw Logan once, about 8 months after the hearing, at a summer track meet 2 towns over. His new school, wherever it was, apparently ran in the same regional circuit as mine. We spotted each other across the infield, and there was a long second where neither of us knew what to do with our faces. He walked over eventually, hands in his pockets, and the first thing he said wasn't sorry, exactly, but it was close. "I never actually wanted your room," he said. "I don't even know why I said that. I think I just wanted somebody to be as mad as I was." I told him I understood better than I had that night, which was true. We didn't hug, didn't exchange numbers, didn't promise to stay in touch the way people do in movies when they want a clean ending. We just stood there for a minute in the heat, 2 kids who'd been used as ammunition in a war neither of us started, and then his coach called him over for the 4x4 relay, and that was that. I don't know if I'll ever see him again. Some part of me hopes I do, if only to prove to both of us that neither of us turned into the worst version of what that year almost made us. Ms. Cho, my old counselor, emailed me that fall to ask how the transfer to my new school in Charlotte had gone, and I told her the truth, that it had gone better than I expected, that I'd made the varsity track team by October, that I still thought about her testimony sometimes. The quiet way she'd laid my whole academic record on a table like it was the most obvious thing in the world that a kid like me hadn't needed fixing. She wrote back one line I've kept a screenshot of since: "You were never the problem in that house, Ethan. I just made sure the court could see it too."